Welcome everyone to Neverwinter on PC. My name is Rainer and today I will be talking about the beloved stat Awareness. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you would like to see more information or videos about Neverwinter, hit the subscribe button. Awareness was first introduced in mod 16 and it was basically never any good. So why was that, and has that changed? Let's start with what Awareness actually does. Awareness reduces damage received when the enemy has combat advantage. So it's not always up, only if the enemy has combat advantage, it reduces the damage of that enemy that it does to you. So there are a couple ways how an enemy can have combat advantage. The first way is the way that players also usually take advantage of it. If you have an enemy on both sides of another unit, those two units on both sides have combat advantage. So if you have an enemy and then a player to the north of the enemy and to the south, you will have combat advantage. And you can actually see this at the bottom of on the floor next to the enemy. There will be a blue edge showing that you have combat advantage. There's also another way. Some enemies or players have powers that give status effects to the player, which also gives combat advantage, like dazed or stunned. Whenever you're in such a status effect, you will always grant combat advantage even if there's no other unit on the other side of you. Typically, it's a stat which you can avoid needing by playing well, avoiding those powers, avoiding that there's enemies on both sides of you. So this is why nobody ever bothered raising their awareness. And the devs recognize that 4 mods later. So with the upcoming changes, the devs want to try and change this lack of wanting awareness. So they try to force them to consider awareness, but I think, have they gone too far? So what they did is the following. In endgame trials, like Tower of the Mad Mage and Cyril's challenge, bosses will always have combat advantage. So it's not anymore a thing about positioning. You cannot avoid it somehow by playing better. They will just always have it. And the reasoning here is that Halaster and Cyril are godly beings and therefore they always have combat advantage. In my eyes, it's a little bit of an easy way out. So what that does is this has the effect that awareness now will, in those trials, always reduce damage. Kind of like defense always reduces damage as well. So it's kind of a second defense now in trials. So it kind of loses the player skill factor here, which I don't really like. In my previous video about stats, I showed you this graph. So here you see the lines for multiple different stats, defensive stats, and how much tankiness these stats increase per 1% stat added. So, for example, here at 45% awareness, green is awareness, if you add 1% at 45%, you would gain about 0.69% tankiness. It would make you more tanky. So the awareness was already pretty high up. This is, of course, in trials. If you have content where awareness is not a factor, awareness is at 0%. It's a flat line. Defense I show is actually underneath here. So I showed it in my previous graph as exactly the same efficiency as awareness. At the bottom you can see also the other stats, which are all lower at all points. So they are not as good as the other two. There was, however, an issue in this graph, which a viewer pointed me at, so thanks for that, because awareness actually is not correct in here. So why is that the case? Well, then we have to look at the formulas. We're going back to the formulas, guys. So defense, we know right now already, it's divided, so what it does with damage, it divides the damage by 1 plus the defense percentage. Very simple. And this goes up to a maximum of dividing by 1.9. So the maximum change it can do to the damage is dividing the damage by 1.9 at 90% defense. Awareness, however, is a completely different function. What it does with damage is it multiplies the damage by 1 plus combat advantage minus awareness. So we have a couple things that are actually opposite here. And this makes the graph actually really different. So the graph that I showed in the first graph was not correct. If we paint the correct picture, you can see something really funny. I already said it's a little bit the opposite. It is actually completely the opposite. So here you see the defense line, it's going down here. It loses efficiency. It's a diminishing return stat, as you can see here. And awareness has exactly the opposite line. If you put a vertical mirror here and you look from the left or the right into that mirror, you would see the same lines, just different colors. So awareness gets better and better the more you put in it. So at 88 or 89%, if you put 1 more percent in, it's almost 1% more tankiness there. If we remove the part of this graph that is not really needed to show here, because who has stats below 30%? I think that's not even possible at the moment, maybe in the future. But if we remove everything below 45% to make this a little bit more compact, you can actually see how important all of a sudden awareness has become. So if you are at 45% defense and awareness, well, don't add defense, because awareness will give you a lot more tankiness. A lot. It's not even close. So I don't know if this was intended this way. And this graph actually, it says tankiness, but this actually is applicable for all classes. So if you want to have some defense to survive mechanics in a trial, and you can pick between defense and awareness, awareness will give you a lot more bang for buck. So this is a drastic change of meta in this place. So yeah, in the conclusion we can say that with these changes, as they stand right now, all classes, so all roles, DPS, healers and tanks, should focus on awareness first instead of defense. For tanks, of course, defense is still very good, so you also want to get that up pretty high because it's still the second best and you want to have more tankiness factors, but awareness is by far the biggest contributing factor as it stands right now. And this is of course subject to change, it's still on preview, but right now awareness is the thing to get. And this is of course very odd all of a sudden, because everyone has defense sources. We are used to having to cap defense first. So yeah, this requires some new tuning, I guess, which can be annoying because people invested in those defense sources. So I don't know if this was intended, but it's definitely how it is right now. So in my opinion, this was actually not the correct thing to do with awareness. Giving Alistair and Cyril combat advantage in all cases, as I already mentioned, it's a little bit too easy. What would have been much better is if Alistair and Cyril would have special attacks somehow that would give status effects to the players, and that would actually give combat advantage. Like for example, in Cyril you have the vulnerability up status effect. That for example could give combat advantage. In the Tower of the Mad Mage trial you have the ice. You could have it in such a way that if you're on the ice, that you give combat advantage to Halaster. And those ways would have been much better, and you can probably add some stuff in there to make it a little bit more complicated, a little bit more player skill related, the stat, instead of just giving them combat advantage by default, which in my eyes is just not correct. So on that bombshell, if you have any remarks on this video or any suggestions on what to investigate next, feel free to leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.